Hello, and welcome again to the Dog Tag Veterans Group. I'm Mike Holub. We've arranged for some interviews with some very dynamic female veterans, all of whom have served or are still serving. Each is an incredible example of a female veteran who's achieved successes in their military and civilian careers. This interview is with Brigadier General retired Alicia Tate Nadeau, who was actually the first woman to be promoted to general in the Illinois Army National Guard. Currently, she is the Executive Director of the City of Chicago's Office of Emergency Management and Communications. I'd like to share with you a little bit of Alicia Tate Nadeau's military background. Brigadier General retired Alicia Tate Nadeau received her commission through the ROTC program of the University of Central Oklahoma. She spent more than 29 years in a variety of command operations and staff assignments, including serving the National Guard Bureau Liaison Officer to the Israeli Home Front Command, Ramla, Israel. She served as the Assistant Adjutant General, Army, Illinois National Guard, and as the Deputy Commanding General, Army National Guard Reserve Component, the U.S. Army Maneuver Support Excellence Center of Excellence, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Her decorations include the Bronze Star, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, the Army Meritorious Service Medal with 6 oak leaf clusters, the Joint Service Command Medal, the Army Commendation Medal with 1 oak leaf cluster, the Joint Service Achievement Medal, the Army Achievement Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters, the Army Reserve Component's Achievement Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, the Humanitarian Service Medal, the Iraq Campaign Medal, the Joint Meritorious Service Award, the Polish Army Bronze Medal, the Combat Action Badge, and the Polish Air Assault Badge. Today, she serves as the Executive Director of the City of Chicago's Office of Emergency Management and Communications, the 3rd largest in the U.S. with a $200 million budget. She and her agency are responsible for preparing Chicago's 2.7 million citizens for emergencies, providing assistance to people, preventing emergencies and disasters from occurring or worsening. This covers more than 4,600 events around the city, including the Central Business District, O'Hare and Midway airports, and specialist events held throughout the city. Thank you for joining us today, Director.
Well, thank you for having me.
Now, this is one of a series of interviews that we're doing with women veterans, and we're sure that these will be very informative and educational videos. One of the questions I'd like to ask is if you could share with us a little bit about your career, when you entered the military service, where you received your commission, some career highlights, duty assignments, those type of things.
So I'd actually like to tell you a little story about how I got my commission and got interested in the military. You know, there's always going to be that one person in your life that sees something in you that you couldn't see in yourself. And no one in my family had ever been in the military. I had pledged a sorority in Oklahoma, and I must admit my grades were not exceptional at the time. But the Dean of Women at my university also was my alum chum for the sorority that I was pledging, and she recommended I take a course called ROTC. At the time I was a business major, and she saw something in me and she said, you know, I think you should take this course called ROTC. You know, business is going to teach you how to manage things. This is going to teach you how to lead people. And I thought that was kind of an interesting way that she put it. Little did I know that her making that recommendation, her looking at me and seeing something in me that I could not see in myself, would end up leading me on a 32-year journey in the military, and completely changed my life and my goals.
Well, you've certainly exemplified true leadership that I know of. And so she saw that in you?
Yeah, she did. And I think the unfortunate part is I never really got an opportunity to thank her. By the time I think I realized exactly the path that she had placed me on, she had passed away. So I never got the opportunity to turn back and tell her thank you. But 32 years in the military, spanning, I've been all over the world, had opportunities that I would have never had otherwise to do. Had the privilege and the honor to serve with some of the most amazing people throughout my career. Everything from, being a platoon leader of a chemical unit to taking folks to Iraq and being the G3 for the Illinois National Guard whenever we had our largest deployment since World War II, of sending folks over to Iraq and then Afghanistan, to helping to develop a brand new program for the Secretary of Defense and his Tiger team that started something called the Civil Support Teams, which help their rapid response element for suspected terrorism here in the United States. I would have never thought that I would have those opportunities, to ending my career being over in Israel for 3 years as a liaison working with the Israeli Defense Force, and trying to look at where their best practices are and how that really relates to counterterrorism in the world that we live in today. I could have never foreseen that to be my future.
It's certainly been a memorable and exemplary career.
It's been a privilege. I mean, I think that's the best way that I can describe it, is, I say that there are a few careers out there that it's a calling. It's not about the job. It's not about the title. It's not about the money. It's a calling. It's whenever you say, better have me do it than somebody else. And being in the military, I think, is that way. I think you have a calling. You say, it's better that I do this than to have somebody else go and do it. And being with soldiers and airmen, frankly, I call it a love affair. Whenever you eat, sleep, drink with people day in and day out, you begin to see them on a whole different level. And I think the values that I've learned through the military, I take with me now in my civilian job too. I'll always have them. I think they're absolutely ingrained to me at a molecular level.
Now, you mentioned a career of 32 years. What type of obstacles did you encounter as you rose through the ranks, and how did you overcome those?
Well, first of all, you have to remember I joined the military in 1986. I didn't realize whenever I joined the military that really women prior to that point had primarily only been officers in the medical corps or in administrative roles. And here I decided to be a chemical officer, which meant that I was going to be in a line unit and I was going to be attached to infantry units and other operational type people out in the field. And I didn't know that you hadn't had women in the military. And I think my first aha is whenever people were like, "Oh, you can't do that, you're a female." But what I did have that, and I'll tell you, is absolutely one of my, I thank this person too, is a guy by the name of Colonel Norman Aschenbrenner. And they jokingly referred to him as Stormin' Norman. Stormin' Norman, I was his one and only female commander at the time. He was my battalion commander. And he treated me exactly like any of his other commanders. Where other people were just getting used to women being in the military and in line units, this man is a Silver Star recipient from Vietnam, and he knew that there was one standard, and that one standard applied to everyone across the board regardless of gender.
As it should.
So whenever I was in my formative years as an officer, he made it abundantly clear to me what it was like and how I should treat my soldiers and what my job was. And I think the fact that I was very blessed in that no one told me I was different or I couldn't do it. I just knew that he expected the very highest level of response or commitment, and I wanted to achieve that. I always wanted to be the very best commander that he had while we were out there. That's what got me off to a good start. Later on in life, you know, there would be times that I would run into people that would first see my gender and not me as an officer or person. But what I found is that very quickly, you know, whenever you start working with people and you lead them, it is your actions that make a difference. And after a while, whenever they knew that they could trust that I was tactically and technically proficient at my job, and that I would stand up for my people and I would take care of my people, they stopped looking at my gender, and they started seeing me as their leader and as their officer. And that was, you know, I would say that's probably the biggest thing. I did have a couple of times whenever I ran into people of another generation in the military that, you know, they thought I was good and I was competent, but they would always want to refer to me as, she's the best female officer I'd have. And I'd have to correct them, and I'd have to say, I don't want to be your best female officer, I want to be your best officer. I never wanted to get anything because of my gender. I wanted to get the rank, get the position, because I was the very best person for the job. And you know, I think that's one of the things that I'm really proud of today whenever I see that migration over a 32-year span, is that I don't see that people now look at women in the military as, you know, the female or anything like that. You know, we have one standard, we expect the very best from them. And I'm happy to say I think I help kind of break that mold for people to see that you know, you are first and foremost an officer, and gender does not count for anything.
Trailblazing in your career.
I was very blessed. You know, I don't think anybody, you can always go back and say, if it wasn't for somebody who came before you, you know, and if you look at the contributions of the Women's Officer Corps and others, you know, the contributions that women have always made in our military, I think it's important. The other thing that I think is important is, if you were to look at the military, we've always been that microcosm of society. You know, before anybody else was going to be integrated, if it was African Americans or females, first we try it out in the military, and then you see the larger piece of the United States come on board and integrate. But we're a really interesting microcosm of society, I think.
So, what are some of the unique challenges facing female veterans today?
This is a great question, and I don't think that we fully, even today, understand all the implications and how things are different for female veterans. And you know, I think it's important to note that male, female veterans, there's a core group of things that are the same regardless. But there are other things that we know have had to change in the VA system that we just never thought about before we entered into this long war of over 15 years. And that is women's health care issues. You know, the VA has spent a lot of time talking about, you know, putting in services for women's issues that, you know, we never had to do before. So I think women, we have to look at that. We really also look at, you know, what are the implications on, regardless of your gender, men, women, what is the implication of 15 years of war for our veterans today? You know, how does that impact not only yourself, but your family? You know, what does that look like whenever this great group of veterans today go out and now they become part of our society and they're leading organizations? I don't necessarily know that there are a lot of things that are different for a female veteran over a male, other than maybe some of the women-related medical issues. You know, we kind of had to change, We never had OBGYN. We never had to, deal with some of those things whenever the predominance of our force was male. But in today's society, we want to make sure that we have the very best soldier or airman that we can, and therefore we've integrated women completely.
Having said that, you made reference to entering the military in 1986. What is different for women entering the military today as compared to when you entered the service?
Oh, it's huge, huge difference. Think about it. Whenever we originally started on this journey, women went through basic training only with women. We segregated at all different levels. And then now, in my generation, over half of my time in the military, we have been a nation at war. That means that you learn to fight next to and eat next to somebody that maybe is not the same gender as you. And I think the biggest thing is the opening of combat arms to women. So it's not fair to say that this is a relatively new revelation. After 15 years, women have been placed in combat situations. We used to think of warfare as being this linear piece where the only people in true, hand-to-hand or front lines combat were a certain type of unit, an infantry unit or something of that nature. But what we learned early on in the war is that if you're a truck driver, you have just as much of a chance having to pick up your weapon and use it as anybody else. So that was kind of an eye-opener. We talked about standards earlier. Many units would say, hey, I'm not going to spend as much time, firing my weapon or talking about how to do an operations order or some of those fundamental things that we as officers or soldiers would do. But as you saw the migration and the change to a new type of warfare, we had to ask everybody to be the very best. Today I look around on the battlefield and you can see, a 90-pound soaking wet young female, on top of a Humvee with a 50 cal. And there would have been a time that would have been absolutely absurd, or that individual would have gone to the firing range and you would have spent more time with her male counterpart than her female, because we wouldn't have expected her to be in that role. Today, she is just as likely to be the person manning that weapon system as a male would. And I think the fact that, now we realize that and we give, women the opportunity to serve in any type of unit, that's transformational. We didn't make it up, though. There are other countries all over the world that have been doing that. And I go back, I reflect on my time with the Israeli Defense Force and their integration of women into their military. They did a great job of understanding there are differences between men and women. Women tend to be, much better at if you looked around this room, a woman would look around the room and she'd be able to tell you that there are 5 things saying on the desk, and they are, a water bottle, a piece of paper, a pair of glasses. It would be very detailed. And a man would look at it and he would tell you, here's how large the table is, and this is what, he would tell you the general scheme. I think the fact that today we don't look at the differences between men and women, we focus on what our strengths are for each of them, and we ensure that we give them the jobs that allow them to enhance those strengths that they have, and instead of trying to make everybody fit in something just like this.
That's a great perspective. By the way, has that change been more of an enticement for women to enter the military service?
This is just my personal opinion whenever we talk about women in the military. The military has always been a place where people have gone, if you wanted to better yourself, if you wanted to have an opportunity to break out of whatever mold society placed you in, the military gave you that opportunity. I think it's interesting, even today, if you were to look at the salary between men and women. You know, women still make less, I think it's like 85 cents to a dollar than men make. In the military, we've always paid them exactly the same.
Right.
You know, we don't differentiate between gender. And again, I think it goes back to find what it is that we have that is uniquely the same, and if there's something that one person does better than the other, I think the military in general, we teach people how to get the most out of the individual.
Now, if you could go back and give yourself any advice before entering the military service, what would that advice be?
You know, I think a lot about this one. You know, as I get older and I reflect back on the past, there are a couple of things I would tell myself. And I think regardless of if I was in the military or not, these are things that I would tell the younger me. Number one, you need balance in your life. You know, there's real balance between your physical, your emotional, and your spiritual piece. You know, it really is that three-legged stool that it's got to be in balance. If you let any of those three get shorter or longer, then at least for me in my lifetime, that's whenever I found that I had challenges in my life. So whenever I talk and I mentor men and women, I oftentimes try to remind them that, you know, don't let anything get out of balance. I think the other thing that I would say is be kind to yourself. You know, we all strive for excellence, but in that band of excellence, you know, not everybody can stay at the top here. Sometimes you have to dip down and take those opportunities whenever you're not at the height of your excellence to reflect and figure out where you want to go. Have a life plan. Look towards the future. I've always had a plan for the future and always truly believed that I could achieve anything I wanted to as long as I was willing to give up whatever it was that I needed to get there. But you've got to have a plan, and you have to have things in balance.
Well, it's worked for you, but did you change that plan at all? Make any
Oh, I did.
alterations to it? Revisit the plan?
I did. I actually had what I would consider, when I've done my plans, they've never been focused just on the military. And whenever I sit down and mentor people, I tell them, you've got to look at your military plan or whatever you're going to do professionally. What does that look like in your personal life too? You know, we can actually set people up for failure if they're trying to have a baby, trying to get a new job, try to be, you know, a commander or in a high stressful military job, and bringing a family along at the same time, get an education. Whenever you've truly got a plan that takes all of those things into account, then you can look and you can say, ooh, that's a lot of stress right now. Maybe we ought to, you know, pull this one forward or back this one off a little bit. And that's what I did with my plan. Is, you know, whenever I could and I've always laid it down on a piece of paper. You know, it's great to have it in your mind, but in my opinion, if you're not going to take the time to put it down on a piece of paper, then you've probably not thought through all the different pieces of it.
General, it's been a pleasure to spend some time with you today and have this little dialogue and learn a little bit more about you. In closing, are there any final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with today?
There are. You know, I think first and foremost, I'd like to thank the men and women that I truly had an honor and a privilege to serve. I tried to do my best. I tried to give it everything I have, but I think my greatest legacy is yet to be, and I think that's the great men and women that are in our armed services today. Every single day they go out there and they put everything on the line. And I do believe that one person can make a difference in the world, and I do believe that there are men and women in uniform today that will continue to be great leaders and have an impact on our country. And to those men and women and to what they will do in the future, I simply want to say thank you. Thank you for everything you do for our country.